Chapter 1. Jonah had planted himself in Byzantium Station's dim, poorly ventilated metal drum excuse for a mess hall, with the sole purpose of getting into a fight, so he didn't see any reason to waste time. "Hey!" he called out, his voice as loud and coarse and belligerent as he could make it. "You with the ponytail!" The cry cast a hush over the room, drawing the eye of every hard-drinking, narrow-eyed cargo hauler in the place. With one exception, of course. That of the mean-looking specimen Jonah was trying to piss off, who continued to hold court among his pals as if nothing had happened. Jonah cleared his throat. Then he ripped off a second remark, making sure he was 2 notches louder and more obnoxious this time, both qualities on which he prided himself. He had a third barb locked and loaded just in case, but it became unnecessary when his chosen victim angrily followed a companion's pointing finger and caught Jonah in his sights. Getting to his feet, the bastard glowered across the room at his unprovoked tormentor, his face the color of murder, and then some. So far, so good, Jonah thought. Being bigger and broader than most everyone he had ever met, he wasn't often the underdog in a fight. But the son of a bitch giving him the evil eye was a good 20 centimeters taller than Jonah and 30 kilos heavier, with a badly flattened nose, a mane of greasy black hair gathered in a long crooked braid, and a cascade of bulging muscles. It's okay, Jonah thought. What's life without a challenge? What did you say? Flatnose rasped, the muscles in his neck standing out like cords. It wasn't that he hadn't caught Jonah's remark perfectly the first time. It was more of a notice to all the 30 or so cargo haulers in the place that he was justified in the pain he was about to inflict. Jonah smiled around the wet, swampy stump of his cigar and kicked away the chair that had supported his feet. It skidded wildly across the floor and clattered into a wall. What I said, he replied slowly but unhesitatingly, is if you're gonna spend the night giggling like a little girl, you ought to do it somewhere people can't hear you. It's just embarrassing. The comment was greeted with bursts of laughter, but when Flatnose cast a glance around the room, it fell silent. Yep, Jonah told himself. You made the right choice. By the way, he added, plucking his cigar out of his mouth and flicking it end over end in Flatnose's direction. I just love what you've done with your nose. Where can I get mine caved in that way? Right on schedule, the cigar hit Flatnose in the chest and plummeted to the floor. The bastard glared at Jonah a moment longer, his nostrils flaring, his eyeballs wide and bloodshot. Then he started moving in the instigator's direction. Jonah held his hands up and rose from his chair, as if he wanted no part of the bigger man. Crap, he said. Don't tell me I've gone and offended you. I've got a real unfortunate habit of doing that. As he spoke, he watched Flatnose's friends. Their hands were slipping towards their weapons, which were concealed, of course, since safety regulations prohibited weapons on the station. Not that haulers didn't ignore safety laws on a fairly regular basis. I'm gonna kill you! Flatnose snapped, tossing aside a chair standing between them. I guess I have offended you, Jonah concluded. Before he knew it, there was a fist in his face, snapping his head back and sending him sprawling over a table full of food. As the haulers seated around it scattered like cockroaches, Jonah rolled and found his feet, just in time to absorb another bludgeoning, skull-rattling impact. Coming up hard against a bulkhead, he tried to get his bearings. "Listen," he said. "I shouldn't have made that remark, all right? No need to get your bloomers in a twist." Predictably, his choice of words made Flatnose even madder. He came after Jonah with redoubled fury, his lips curled back from his teeth as if he were a wolf and Jonah were his dinner. But before he could connect again, Jonah ducked, allowing Flatnose to crack his knuckles on the bulkhead instead. Pulling his fist back, the bigger man yowled with pain. "That's gotta hurt," said Jonah, moving at an angle away from the bulkhead so he had room to maneuver. "You want me to kiss your boo-boo?" His eyes popping with fury, Flatnose heaved a table aside and moved on Jonah again. But this time he was a little more measured about it, a little more cautious. "Come on," said Jonah. "Don't be shy." He turned his cheek and pointed to it. "Go ahead. Show me some love." The words were barely out of his mouth when Flatnose unleashed another attack. This time Jonah deflected the blow with a flick of his forearm, stepped inside it, and drove home a point of his own. It was as hard as Jonah had ever hit anyone, and it sent blood flying from Flatnose's mouth. But big as the bastard was, he didn't go crashing down to the floor. He just stood there, a blank stare on his face, as if he were trying to remember who he was and why his face hurt so much. But Jonah knew the guy wouldn't keep blinking forever. Before Flatnose could respond, Jonah swung his foot into the bigger man's crotch. With a squeal of pain, Flatnose doubled over. Then Jonah stepped forward and launched an uppercut that flipped the bugger like an oversized flapjack. Red stuff streaming from his mouth and nostrils, Flatnose hit the deck like a ton of ore. But Jonah knew it wasn't over, not as long as the sucker's friends were around. When their boy was on top, they hadn't lifted a finger to stop the fight. Now that he was stretched out on the deck, they would have business to take care of. Right on cue, they pulled out their stun pistols and went for Jonah. And though he had weapons of his own concealed beneath his jacket, it wasn't going to save him from a 3-against-1. Not without some help. "Come on!" he urged Flatnose's friends. "Blow me away, 'cause if you don't, you might wind up like your sissy friend here." Suddenly, 2 of the 3 went down face first, as if leveled from behind by an invisible hand. A moment later, Jonah caught a glimpse of Vriess in his souped-up wheelchair, applying a palm shocker to each of the fallen haulers. The poor bastards didn't know what kind of muscle-twitching torture they were in for. But Jonah did, and though Vriess wouldn't get any particular pleasure from applying the palm shocker, the unabashedly sadistic Jonah would get enough for both of them. Meanwhile, one of Flatnose's compadres was still standing, but the fall of his pals had distracted him, and before he could get undistracted, he was drop-kicked by a blonde man half his girth. "Crack," thought Jonah. "Punctual as ever." As Flatnose's body fell, he wound up in the lap of an innocent bystander who, less than pleased with the intrusion, grabbed him by his shirt and began pounding on him. Which led to an altercation between 2 other haulers, neither of whom was associated with either Jonah's faction or Flatnose's, which inevitably resulted in a second skirmish and a third. Jonah grinned. "The more we do this, the better we get." But then, haulers were always spoiling for a fight. It was simply a matter of lighting the fuse. With both Flatnose and his buddies occupied, Jonah could have just sat back and watched events unfold. But it was a party, and he wouldn't be happy until everyone was having a good time. With that in mind, he walked over to an unsuspecting, liquor-addled spectator and sucker-punched him across a table. "Hey!" a red-bearded hauler bellowed. "That's my buddy, you low-life piece of crap!" "Do something about it!" Jonah bellowed back and braced himself for the hauler's charge. Still crouching silently behind a bulkhead at the intersection of two corridors, Call consulted her inner chronometer. By now, she noted, Jonah should have brought things to a boil. But she hadn't heard the crackle of the station's intercom yet. Call turned to look back at her burner-toting companion, who seemed a bit more feral than usual, a trick of the shadows carving hollows beneath her eyes and cheekbones. But the real hollows weren't in the woman's face, were they? They were in her soul. Call frowned at the pretentiousness of her observation. Who am I to talk about souls? Just then, the intercom around the corner came to life. "Security to the mess hall! On the double, assholes! We got ourselves a situation!" Call craned her neck and peered past the edge of the bulkhead. She could see and hear the two security guards posted there exchanging predictably resentful remarks as they went pelting in the direction of the mess hall. Finally, they turned into a perpendicular passage and vanished from sight. Then all Call could perceive of them were their retreating footfalls, which eventually faded to nothing. Had she been working with someone else, she would have turned then and relayed the information. But in this case, it wasn't necessary. Her companion didn't need to see the guards to know that they had left their post. After all, her name was Ripley. She could do a lot of things other people couldn't. Since Ripley was the one with the burner in her hands, she led the way into the passage. Her progress was graceful and economical, her stride the stride of a hunter. Call tried to walk the same way, but she couldn't. She hadn't been built with stealth in mind. Halfway to the next intersection, just past where the guards had been posted, Call and Ripley came to a circular seam in the deck. Had they not known to look for it, they would almost certainly have missed it. But they did know. And, having seen its like on dozens of stations before this one, they knew what to do with it. Placing her burner on the deck outside the seam, Ripley got down on her knees and pressed her palms against the circumscribed surface. Then, with a ripple of her jaw muscles, she twisted with both hands in a counterclockwise direction and, eliciting a brief, high-pitched shriek of metal against metal, began unscrewing what turned out to be a cover. When Ripley had twisted it off completely, she set it to the side as if it were a dinner plate. It left her with an opening slightly greater in diameter than the width of her shoulders, and an unobstructed view of the well-lit passage below. Retrieving her weapon, Ripley got to her feet. Then, without warning or hesitation, she took a step forward and plummeted through the opening. A moment later, her boots made a reassuringly solid thunk as she landed. Giving Ripley a chance to get out of the way, Call hunkered down beside the hole, planted her hands on either side of it, and lowered herself through. Only after she was hanging full length from the higher deck did she relinquish her grip, allowing herself to drop the last half-meter or so. As she came down beside Ripley, she looked around. They were at the nexus of 6 corridors, each projecting from the next at an angle of 60 degrees. All 6 passages were lined with gaudy little red and green computer readouts, each one flashing data in accordance with a different function. There didn't seem to be anyone around, but flesh and blood wasn't Call's expertise. She turned to her companion for her assessment. Ripley's nostrils flared as she cast her senses out like a net, searching the vicinity for company. After a moment, she nodded, apparently satisfied. "We're clear," Call thought. She started down one of the corridors, seemingly at random, but without question it was in that direction that her and her companion would find the unit they wanted, an older one kept strictly as backup in case one of the newer ones failed. Call was certain because she had seen this layout many times before, stamped out as if with a cookie cutter. In the years when these stations were built, it was cheaper to manufacture them with only one set of specs in mind. The strategy hadn't helped the company that manufactured them stay in business. Not that Call would be shedding a tear for it anytime soon. She didn't have much use for corporations, or for that matter, the governments that sanctioned them. As she moved down the corridor, she felt as if the computers on either side were calling out to her, like prisoners in an old-fashioned cell block, flashing pleas for help instead of codes. Stupid, she thought, ascribing emotions to data crunchers. Next, you'll be organizing a breakout. A moment later, Call found the particular little red readout she was looking for. Ripley, who had seen these places as often as Call had, flipped open a panel just below the readout and removed a tightly coiled cord with a long, slim needle at its terminus. Call scowled at the sight of it, but Ripley, who had never had much patience with her companion's feelings in this regard, thrust the needle at her nonetheless. "Do it," she said. "I'm doing it," Call assured her. First, she unfastened the button on her cuff and rolled her sleeve up past her elbow. Then she used her other hand to remove a mole from her forearm, or rather, what looked like a mole. In fact, it was a cap for the access port in her arm, anchored by the slim white string now dangling from it. Call cursed under her breath as she accepted the needle from Ripley. "I hate this," she said. Ripley nodded. "I know. You've only told me 150 times." Not so long ago, Call could have accessed the computer just by blinking. That was one of the abilities with which she and her fellow second-generation androids had been equipped. But after her model rebelled against its makers, Call and her comrades burned their modem drives so as not to be located through them. Now she had to gain access to the computer manually. But that wasn't why she hated doing so. It was the way she felt when she interacted with a machine, like her insides were turning to liquid, like she wasn't real. It was hard to explain to a human being. She knew because she had tried. Only another android might have understood her, and for all Call knew, there weren't any other androids. Considering the fervor with which the authorities had hunted them down, she might well have been the last of them. There's a cheery thought. Gritting her teeth, Call slipped the needle through the hole in her artificial skin, inserted it snugly into her hidden port, and closed her eyes. Instantly, the rush of incoming data swept her away, immersed her, became her. It was brilliant, blinding, terrible, relentless. A ponderous, clashing interplay of forces, unlike any she had known in the real world. The android struggled to assert her identity, her separateness, while leaving herself open to everything around her. It wasn't easy. It made her sick to what would have been her stomach if she were half as human as she looked. Still, she endured the sensation and forced herself deeper into the data system. Resistance. Layer upon layer of it. insisting that she yield to the logic of her environment. It wanted her to be a logarithm, accommodating all its other logarithms in vicious, lockstep perfection. No, Call thought. I'm more than that, damn it. But she didn't think it too hard, because it would have slowed her progress. Carefully, she descended, negotiating a path around one data explosion after the other, picking her way, first with the current and then against it, conserving herself, expending herself, until at last, in an incendiary burst of effort, she got to the place she was looking for, and the information she sought. Finally, she thought, glad beyond words that an end was in sight. But no sooner had the android reached her objective than she realized there was more, much more. A whole abyss full, she thought, marveling at its brilliance from the brink overlooking it. And it was exactly the kind of stuff they needed. Unfortunately, Call would have to delve deeper to get it, and that made her already fritzing nerves fritz a little more. But she couldn't turn her back on a load like this one, not when it might give them the last precious piece of their puzzle. Hell, she asked herself with cynical abandon, what's the worst that can happen? Deciding it was a better idea not to think about it, she steeled herself and dove. And the deeper she went, the brighter and more insistent grew the data currents, picking at her like scavengers, trying to take bloody chunks out of her psyche. But Call couldn't let herself worry about it. She had to concentrate on what she was doing. When she reached the first node, she picked it clean. The same with the second, and then the third. And she kept going, into places where the data was forgotten and even incomplete, though there was invariably enough remaining to serve her purpose. Laboriously, painstakingly, Call gathered every tidbit in reach, and though the task seemed indeterminable, she eventually got it all. But she had paid a price. Her dedication forced her to drop her guard against the predations of the currents, and they left the edges of her consciousness in cold, wet tatters. The question then was whether there was enough left of Call to fight her way back to the real world, where what she had gathered could be of use. She didn't know, but she was damned well going to find out. Closing her eyes against the light, she climbed, and she kept at it, arms and legs pumping, regardless of what buffeted her in the course of her ascent. Her burden was heavier and more unwieldy than she had imagined. It threatened to drag her back every time she made some progress, conspiring to keep her trapped in the deepest parts of the abyss. More than once, she thought about cutting some of it loose so she could bring back the rest. But she hadn't made it that far by playing it safe, so she battled that much harder, pitting her strength against the fury of the storm. And an eternity later, cradling her last shreds of self-awareness, she found herself reaching for the blessed darkness. And with a final burst of determination, emerging into the real world again. Slumping against the computer she had accessed, Call felt its hardness, its truth, its undeniable existence. Damn, she thought, gasping for identity, taking in long, ragged drafts of it. That sucked. She never wanted to go in that deep again. Never. But it had been worth it. If she was right about what she had collected, it would be the last time she had to go in at all. Abruptly, Ripley's face loomed in front of her, her expression one of impatience. Got it? She asked. Yes, said Call. Out of pique, she decided not to say yet just how much she had gotten. "And I'm fine, thanks for asking." Giving in to her revulsion, she plucked the needle out of her arm and thrust it back at Ripley. Then she recovered her mole and stuffed its string back under her flesh. "All right," she said. "Let's go." But Ripley was on the move already, heading back for the intersection of corridors with long, purposeful strides. Swearing softly, Call fell in behind her. It was a difficult thing to keep up with someone so manically single-minded. The android was just glad Ripley was on her side. After all, she had briefly had a taste of the alternative. It was years earlier, on the Auriga. Call had intended to kill Ripley because she believed Ripley had a monster inside her. As it turned out, the monster had already been ripped out. But the monster's genes were still present in Ripley, slithering through her tissues, accelerating her metabolism. She was strong enough to put a knuckle-shaped dent in a bulkhead, durable enough to survive a bolt from a shock rifle at point-blank range. And her blood, given enough time, could eat its way through a meter-thick section of hull. Yet the monster's influence was most evident in Ripley's mind. At her core, she was a stone-cold predator, her every move designed to bring her closer to a quick and efficient kill. It was only by controlling her murderous instincts, no easy feat at times, that she was able to exist among humans. Funny, thought Call. Ripley's alien heritage couldn't be seen in her appearance. She looked as human as any other healthy, athletic woman who had spent some time in the gym. But then, Call added inwardly, "So do I, and they put me together on a damned assembly line."